Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. My flight from Seattle had landed at JFK around noon that Saturday, and by the time I dropped my bags at the hostel in Brooklyn, I had maybe 5 hours of daylight left to explore. September in New York carried that perfect crispness in the air, the kind that makes everything feel cinematic and full of promise. I had saved for this trip since my sophomore year of college. Graduation money combined with 18 months of bartending shifts at a place back home that smelled permanently of stale beer and regret. 23 felt like the right age to finally see the city I had only known through movies and songs, and I wanted to squeeze every single moment out of those 4 days. My camera bag hung heavy across my chest, a Nikon my dad had passed down to me before he got sick, and I had promised myself I would fill every memory card with shots worth framing. Battery Park was my first stop because everyone online said the view of the Statue of Liberty from there was something you had to witness in person. The late afternoon light was painting everything gold when I finally made it there. Tourists clustered along the waterfront, street vendors selling pretzels and knockoff sunglasses, the whole scene buzzing with that particular New York energy I had dreamed about for years. I was adjusting my lens near the sea glass carousel when he walked up to me. This guy may be in his late 30s with a Yankees cap pulled low and a messenger bag slung across his shoulder. He had one of those faces that seemed instantly familiar, like someone you went to high school with, or maybe saw at your local grocery store every Sunday morning. His smile was easy, relaxed, the kind that made you want to smile back without thinking about it. He asked if I was a photographer, nodding at my camera, and I told him I was just an amateur trying to capture something special. He laughed at that, said he could always spot the serious ones by the way they handled their equipment, the way they looked at light instead of just objects. Then he leaned in a little closer, lowered his voice like he was sharing something valuable, and told me about this rooftop spot 3 blocks away that gave you a view of lower Manhattan that would make my Instagram explode. He said it was an old commercial building, nothing fancy, but real New Yorkers knew about it. Used it for engagement photos and album covers and the kind of shots that made people ask, "Where the hell did you take that?" Something about the way he described it, the specific details about the angle of the sunset, and the way the Freedom Tower lined up perfectly with the older buildings around it, made it sound legitimate. I figured this was exactly the kind of local secret I had hoped to stumble into. He introduced himself as Kevin, said he worked as a location scout for indie film productions around the city, which explained how he knew all these hidden gems. We started walking and he kept the conversation going the whole time, asking about Seattle, about what I did for work, about how long I was staying in the city. He seemed genuinely interested, laughing at my jokes, sharing little anecdotes about the neighborhoods we passed through. The streets got quieter as we moved away from the waterfront, the crowds thinning out until it was mostly just us and the occasional person walking their dog or hauling groceries up concrete steps. I noticed the buildings changing too, the shiny storefronts giving way to older structures with faded awnings and windows covered in dust. Kevin explained that this part of the financial district was mostly empty on weekends, all office workers gone home to Jersey or Long Island, which is why the rooftop stayed such a well-kept secret. He pointed ahead to a 6-story building wedged between 2 taller ones, its brick facade stained with decades of city grime, a fire escape zigzagging down its front like a metal scar. The entrance was around the side, through an alley that smelled like garbage left too long in the sun, and something else underneath, something chemical and sharp that burned the back of my throat. Kevin pulled out a key attached to a lanyard with some production company logo on it, another detail that made everything seem normal and professional. The metal door groaned when he pushed it open, revealing a lobby that looked like it had been frozen in time since maybe the 70s. All brown tiles and water-stained ceiling panels, and an elevator with an out-of-order sign taped crookedly across its doors. He apologized for the state of the place, said the building owners were in some kind of legal dispute so maintenance had basically stopped, but promised the view from the top was worth the climb. The stairwell was worse than the lobby. Graffiti covering every available surface in layers so thick you could see where older tags had been painted over by newer ones. Names and symbols and crude drawings fighting for space on the walls. Our footsteps echoed against the concrete, bouncing off the narrow walls in a way that made it sound like more people were climbing with us. I remember thinking how strange it was that my phone had lost signal the moment we stepped inside, but Kevin was already 2 flights ahead, calling back for me to keep up, and I didn't want to seem like the paranoid tourist who couldn't handle a little urban exploration. By the 3rd floor, my legs were burning and sweat had started to gather at the base of my neck, despite the cool air seeping through cracks in the walls. Kevin had stopped talking, his earlier chattiness replaced by a focused silence that I told myself was just concentration on the climb. The hallways we passed on each landing were dark, doors hanging open to reveal empty rooms filled with debris, old office furniture overturned and covered in dust, cables hanging from dropped ceiling tiles like dead vines. On the 4th floor, I caught a glimpse of something that made me pause. A mattress shoved into the corner of one room with empty bottles scattered around it. A makeshift shelter that suggested someone had been living here recently. Kevin noticed me looking and said it was probably just some homeless guy who crashed here during winter. Nothing to worry about. The building was empty now. But his voice had changed, lost that warm friendliness from before. And when he turned to continue climbing, I noticed for the first time how his shoulders had tensed up beneath his jacket. I should have turned around right then. Should have made some excuse about my asthma or a phone call I needed to make. But we were already so close to the top, and I had come this far, and part of me still believed in that perfect photograph waiting on the roof. The 5th floor is where everything changed. Kevin walked past the stairwell that continued up to 6 and instead turned down a corridor lined with old storage rooms, their doors marked with faded numbers and symbols I didn't recognize. I asked him if the roof access was this way, and he said yeah, through the maintenance area at the end of the hall, trust me. The fluorescent lights overhead were mostly dead, only one still working about halfway down, buzzing and flickering in a way that cast dancing shadows across the peeling paint on the walls. Our footsteps kicked up dust that swirled in the weak light, and I could hear water dripping somewhere nearby, a steady rhythm that echoed through the emptiness. Kevin stopped at a door near the end, this heavy metal thing with rust bleeding down from its hinges, and he pulled out another key from his pocket. The door swung inward with a screech that seemed impossibly loud in the silence, revealing a room maybe 15 feet square, stacked with old filing cabinets and cardboard boxes and a single metal chair sitting in the center like it was waiting for someone. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling, barely illuminating the space, and there were no windows, no other doors, definitely no roof access. I turned to ask Kevin what was going on, and that's when I heard the click of the lock engaging behind us. Kevin was standing between me and the door, and the person I was looking at now bore almost no resemblance to the friendly guy who had approached me at Battery Park. His posture had shifted, shoulders squared, feet planted wide, his whole body blocking the only exit. The easy smile was gone, replaced by an expression I can only describe as coldly professional, like a mechanic about to start work on an engine. He reached into his messenger bag, and when his hand came out, it was holding a box cutter with the blade already extended, that little strip of metal catching the light from the bare bulb overhead. He told me to stay calm, said this could go easy or hard depending on how I chose to handle it, and his voice was flat now, completely stripped of the warmth that had convinced me to follow him here. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my mind was racing through every self-defense video I had ever half-watched on YouTube, every news story about tourists who ended up as statistics. He took a step closer and told me to put my backpack on the ground, slowly, no sudden movements. The blade of that box cutter looked impossibly sharp, the kind of tool designed to slice through packaging tape and cardboard but perfectly capable of opening up skin just as easily. I asked him what he wanted, even though I already knew, hoping that keeping him talking would buy me time to figure something out. He listed it off like a shopping list: backpack, wallet, camera, passport, phone, anything valuable in my pockets. And then he said something that made the full weight of the situation crash down on me. He said nobody checks these floors on weekends. The building security only does the lobby, and the cops don't respond to calls from this address anymore because there's been too many false alarms from the motion sensors going haywire. He said he could keep me in this room for hours and nobody would hear a thing. Nobody would come looking. Nobody would even know to start searching until I missed my flight back to Seattle. The way he said it, so matter of fact, made it clear this wasn't his first time doing this. I thought about my dad's camera hanging around my neck, the one thing I had left of him after the cancer took everything else, and something inside me cracked at the idea of handing it over to this person who had manipulated me with such practiced ease. But the box cutter was right there, maybe 4 feet away, and Kevin's eyes never left mine, tracking every tiny movement I made like a predator watching prey decide whether to run or freeze. I started taking off my backpack, moving slowly like he told me, my brain working overtime to find any advantage in this situation. The room was cramped and cluttered, filing cabinets pushed against the walls, cardboard boxes stacked in uneven towers, that single metal chair sitting between us like some kind of sick joke. Kevin gestured with the box cutter for me to toss the bag toward him, and I did, watching it land at his feet with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the confined space. He kicked it behind him without looking, keeping his eyes locked on me, and then pointed the blade at my chest and told me the camera was next. My fingers were trembling as I lifted the strap over my head, and I found myself talking without really planning to, telling him about my dad, about the cancer, about how this camera was the only thing I had left of him. I don't know why I thought appealing to his humanity would work. Maybe desperation makes you stupid. But something flickered across his face for just a second, this tiny crack in that cold, professional mask. He told me to shut up and put the camera on the ground, but his voice had wavered just slightly, and in that moment I noticed something I had missed before. There was a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall behind one of the filing cabinets, half hidden by a stack of boxes, its red metal casing faded but the safety pin still visible in the handle. I lowered myself slowly, like I was about to set down the camera, and I kept talking, kept pushing on that crack I had seen in his composure. I told him my dad used to take me to Mariners games with this camera, taught me how to shoot in manual mode in our backyard, spent his last good summer driving me around the Pacific Northwest, looking for the perfect sunset. Kevin told me again to shut up, louder this time, and he took a step forward with the box cutter raised, but I could see his jaw clenching and unclenching, see the way his free hand had balled into a fist at his side. That was when I moved, not toward the door because he was blocking it, but sideways toward that filing cabinet, my shoulder slamming into the stack of boxes and sending them tumbling across the floor. Kevin lunged at me but tripped over one of the fallen boxes, cursing as he stumbled, and I grabbed the fire extinguisher off the wall with both hands, yanking the pin out in one desperate motion. The foam erupted in his face before he could recover, a thick white blast that covered his eyes and mouth and sent him reeling backward, clawing at his skin and gasping for air. The box cutter clattered to the ground somewhere in the chaos, and I didn't wait to see where it landed. I dropped the extinguisher and grabbed my backpack from the floor, slinging it over one shoulder as I fumbled with the lock on the door. My fingers felt thick and useless, slipping on the metal mechanism while behind me Kevin was coughing and spitting and making sounds that didn't even seem human. The lock finally gave way, and I threw myself into the hallway, my sneakers sliding on the dusty floor as I sprinted toward the stairwell. I could hear him coming after me, his footsteps heavy and uneven, still choking on the foam but moving faster than I expected. I took the stairs 3 at a time, my hand burning against the metal railing as I swung myself around each landing, not daring to look back. 4th floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, my lungs screaming for air and my legs threatening to give out beneath me. When I hit the lobby, I shoulder-checked the front door so hard the glass panel cracked, but it swung open and suddenly I was outside in the alley, the late afternoon sun blinding after the darkness of that building. I ran without direction, just moving, weaving between dumpsters and parked cars until I burst out onto a street full of people and traffic, and normal life continuing like nothing had happened. A woman walking her dog actually screamed when she saw me, and I caught a glimpse of myself in a storefront window. My face pale and streaked with sweat. White foam from the extinguisher splattered across my shirt, my eyes wild with something that looked a lot like madness. I found a police officer 2 blocks later, standing outside a deli with a coffee in his hand, and I must have sounded completely insane trying to explain what had just happened. But he called it in, and within 20 minutes there were 4 more cops, and I was sitting in the back of a patrol car with a blanket around my shoulders, even though I wasn't cold. They searched the building, but Kevin was gone, slipped out through some back exit or fire escape, vanished into the city like he had never existed. My camera was still around my neck, my passport still in my backpack, everything I had nearly lost still with me. The cops told me I was lucky, said they had seen this scam before. Tourists lured into abandoned buildings and robbed at knife point, sometimes worse. They said most victims just handed everything over because fighting back usually ended badly, and I should consider myself fortunate that my stupid, desperate move with the fire extinguisher had actually worked. I spent the rest of my trip in a daze, jumping at every stranger who made eye contact, unable to shake the memory of Kevin's flat voice telling me nobody would hear, nobody would come. I still have my dad's camera, still use it almost every day, but I have never gone back to New York. Some cities just hold too many ghosts, even the ones that are still breathing. Friday nights used to be my favorite part of the week. After spending 5 years climbing the ladder at a marketing firm in Midtown, those late drives home through Manhattan became my decompression ritual. My name is Corinne, and in November of 2022, a few weeks before my class reunion from graduating high school in 2005, I experienced something that rewired the way I move through this city forever. I had just wrapped up a client dinner near Columbus Circle that ran way too long, and by 11:30, I was exhausted and ready to collapse into my apartment up in Washington Heights. The drive should have taken 20 minutes, maybe less with the streets clearing out. I remember the air that night being sharp and cold, the kind that makes your breath visible the second you step outside. My Subaru Outback had been running rough all week, making this rattling sound from somewhere under the hood, and I kept telling myself I would take it to the mechanic that weekend. I took my usual route north through Harlem, cruising up Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard, where the storefronts were already dark and the sidewalks mostly empty. A few people stood outside a bodega on 125th Street, but past that, the avenue stretched out quiet and wide like a runway. I had my windows up, heat blasting, some podcast playing low about true crime investigations, ironic considering what was about to happen. There was this particular intersection around 145th Street that I always dreaded, because the light took forever to change, and you could sit there for what felt like 2 full minutes, with absolutely nothing moving around you. That night, I pulled up to that exact red light at 11:47. I know the time because I glanced at the dashboard clock, wondering how much longer until I could finally be home. A delivery truck was parked on the right side of the street, one of those white box trucks with no company logo just sitting there with its hazard lights off. I did not think anything of it. People double park in Harlem all the time, trucks making late deliveries to restaurants, that sort of thing. I had no idea someone was standing behind it watching me approach. About 10 seconds into the red light, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A figure stepped out from behind the delivery truck, and at first I thought it was just a guy crossing the street or walking to his car. He was wearing a dark hoodie pulled tight around his face, baggy jeans and white sneakers that seemed too bright for the rest of him. What caught my attention was his pace. He was not walking with any kind of purpose or direction. He moved slow, almost lazy, like he was searching for something on the ground. His head was down, scanning the asphalt near the curb, and he drifted closer to my lane with each step. I told myself he probably dropped his phone or his keys, maybe looking for something he lost earlier. But there was this wrongness to the whole scene that I could not shake, this instinct screaming at me from somewhere deep in my chest. My foot hovered over the gas pedal even though the light was still solid red. I watched him through my side mirror. then turned my head slightly to track his movement. He was maybe 15 feet from my car now, still pretending to look for whatever imaginary thing he had supposedly lost. Then he looked up. Just for a second, a quick glance directly at my window before his eyes went back down to the pavement. That single look told me everything I needed to know. His face was young, maybe early 20s, with a patchy beard and these flat, empty eyes that held no emotion whatsoever. He was not searching for anything. He was hunting. I reached for the lock button on my door, that automatic reflex when you sense danger, but my locks were already engaged. Thank God I had that habit drilled into me from years of city driving. The man kept drifting closer in that same shuffling, aimless way, but now I could see his trajectory was calculated. He was positioning himself between my car and the delivery truck, shielding his body from any cars that might pass on the opposite side of the boulevard. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it over the podcast still mumbling through my speakers. The light stayed red. I checked my mirrors frantically, hoping to see another car pulling up behind me, a police cruiser, anyone. The street was completely deserted. He reached my car in what felt like slow motion, though it could not have been more than 5 or 6 seconds. The man stopped right next to my driver's side door and crouched down, bringing his face level with my window. Up close, I could see details I wished I had never noticed. A small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, chapped lips, and a silver chain peeking out from under his hoodie. He looked at me the way someone looks at an object, not a person, just assessing value and calculating risk. His breath fogged up a small circle on my window glass. I gripped my steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white, my whole body rigid like I had been plugged into an electrical socket. He did not say anything at first. He just stared, letting the silence do its work, letting me understand exactly how vulnerable I was in that moment. Then his right hand moved to the bottom of his hoodie, and he lifted the fabric just a few inches, enough for me to see the black grip of a handgun tucked into his waistband. The metal caught a sliver of light from the street lamp above. My throat closed up completely. I could not have screamed if I wanted to. He tapped the barrel of the gun against my window, 2 soft knocks that somehow sounded louder than anything I had ever heard. His other hand reached for my door handle and pulled. The mechanism clicked but held firm, and I watched his jaw tighten with irritation. He tapped the glass again, harder this time, and made a gesture with his chin toward the lock button. Unlock it. That was what he wanted. His eyes never left mine, and in them I saw nothing. No anger, no excitement, no hesitation. Just blank determination, like this was his job and I was just another task to complete. I thought about my phone sitting in my purse on the passenger seat, completely useless. I thought about my parents in Connecticut who had begged me for years to move somewhere safer. I thought about every news story I'd ever read about women found in abandoned lots, about bodies discovered in the trunk of their own cars. The red light hung above the intersection, like it had forgotten how to change. I had maybe 2 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether I lived or died. I slammed my foot on the gas so hard the tires screamed against the asphalt. The car lurched forward, and I heard a thud. His hand or maybe his body hitting the side panel as I tore away from him. I did not look back. I did not check my mirrors. I just drove, blowing through that red light at what must have been 50 miles per hour, my entire body shaking with adrenaline that felt like fire in my veins. Another intersection came up, red light, and I ran that one too. A taxi honked somewhere to my left, but I barely registered it. I was sobbing now, these ugly, gasping cries that I could not control. My vision blurred with tears as I gripped the wheel and kept my foot pressed down. A third intersection, this one green by some miracle, and I flew through it without slowing down. I did not know where I was going anymore. I just knew I had to put distance between myself and that man, that gun, that horrible tapping sound on my window. Somewhere around 155th Street, I finally pulled over next to a fire hydrant, threw the car into park, and completely fell apart. I sat there for what must have been 10 minutes, crying so hard I could barely breathe, my whole body trembling like I had been dropped into freezing water. Every few seconds I would whip my head around to check if anyone was approaching, if somehow he had followed me, if another figure was lurking between the parked cars lining the street. My hands fumbled with my phone, dropping it twice before I managed to dial 911. The operator's voice sounded distant and tinny, and I had to repeat myself 3 times before she understood what I was saying through my sobs. She told me to stay in my vehicle with the doors locked, that officers were being dispatched to my location. I remember staring at a crack in my windshield, a tiny chip I had been meaning to fix for months, and focusing on it like it was the only real thing in the world. The minutes stretched out impossibly long. I kept seeing his face in my mind, those flat, dead eyes, the way he had looked at me like I was already gone. When the red and blue lights finally appeared in my rearview mirror, I started crying all over again, this time from relief so intense it felt like my chest might crack open. 2 officers approached my car, a woman named Ortega and her partner, a tall guy with a shaved head whose name I never caught. Officer Ortega had me step out of the vehicle and sit in the back of their cruiser while I gave my statement. I described everything: the delivery truck, the man's hoodie and white sneakers, the scar through his eyebrow, the gun tucked into his waistband. My voice kept breaking, and I had to stop several times to collect myself. But Ortega was patient, nodding along and taking notes on a small pad. When I finished, she exchanged a look with her partner that made my stomach turn. It was the kind of look that said they had heard this story before, that what happened to me was not random or unusual. She asked me to describe the intersection again, the timing, how long I had been sitting at the light before he appeared. Then she leaned forward and told me something that made the whole nightmare even worse. This was a known method, she said. Organized. Groups of men working those wide, quiet avenues in Upper Manhattan, specifically targeting women alone in their cars at red lights late at night. She explained how it worked, and every word landed like a punch to my gut. They wait behind parked vehicles, delivery trucks, vans, anything large enough to provide cover, and watch for cars driven by single female occupants. They approach slowly, pretending to search for something on the ground so they do not attract attention. Once they reach the car, they crouch to avoid being seen by passing traffic and flash the weapon through the window. Most victims unlock the door out of pure terror, and then they are forced to drive to abandoned lots in the Bronx or out near the waterfront in Queens. What happens next depends on the crew, Ortega said. But robbery is just the beginning. Some victims have been held for hours, driven to multiple ATMs to drain their accounts. Others have been assaulted. Few have never been found at all. The officers told me I did exactly the right thing by running that light. That hesitation in those situations almost always ends badly. Her partner added that most people freeze, that the gun is usually enough to override every survival instinct screaming at them to run. I thought about how close I had come to unlocking that door, how my finger had actually twitched toward the button before something deeper took over. A few millimeters of movement and I might have become another statistic, another missing person flyer stapled to a telephone pole. The officers drove me home that night because I was in no condition to get behind the wheel again. My car sat on that street until the next morning when my friend Denise came with me to pick it up in the daylight. There was a small dent on the driver's side panel, right below the mirror, proof that I had actually hit him when I sped away, that the whole thing was not some elaborate nightmare my exhausted brain had invented. I filed a full report at the precinct the following day, sat with a sketch artist, did everything they asked me to do. But Ortega was honest with me from the start. Without surveillance footage or witnesses, the chances of catching him were slim. These men knew where the cameras were, knew which blocks had broken streetlights, knew exactly how to disappear back into the city the moment their target escaped. She said they would add my description to the file and increase patrols in that area, but I could tell from her tone that she had made this same promise to dozens of women before me. I never heard back about the case. I assume it sits in a drawer somewhere, unsolved, gathering dust alongside all the others. It has been 2 years since that night, and I have not driven through Harlem after dark a single time. I sold my apartment in Washington Heights and moved to a place in Brooklyn, closer to my office, closer to streets that stay crowded even at midnight. I take the subway now when I work late, or I call a car service and sit in the back where someone else has to worry about the red lights. My therapist says I've made real progress, that the nightmares have decreased, and my hypervigilance is getting better, but some things do not heal all the way. I still check my locks 3 times before I start driving. I still feel my pulse spike whenever I stop at an intersection after sunset. And sometimes on quiet nights when I am walking to my building, I catch myself scanning the shadows behind parked trucks, looking for a figure in a dark hoodie pretending to search for something on the ground. I know he is still out there, that man with the scar through his eyebrow and the dead eyes. Maybe he found another victim that same night. Maybe he is still working that same stretch of avenue, waiting behind that same delivery truck. I got away, but that does not mean it ended. Just means he moved on to the next red light, the next woman alone in her car, the next person who might not be lucky enough to keep their doors locked. "11 years out of college and I was still pulling late shifts at a publishing house in Manhattan, proofreading manuscripts that nobody would probably ever read. My mom liked to remind me during our Sunday calls that her friend's son, same graduation year as me, had already made partner at some law firm in Boston. That particular night, a Wednesday in early March 2024, I had stayed until almost midnight fixing a disaster of a memoir from some retired CEO who thought commas were optional. The office had emptied out hours ago, and the cleaning crew was already vacuuming the hallways when I finally grabbed my bag and headed for the subway. I lived in Astoria, which meant catching the N train from Midtown and riding it about 40 minutes to get home. Usually I would scroll through my phone or read something on my Kindle, but that night I remember feeling completely drained, the kind of tired where your eyes burn and your thoughts move through mud. The platform at 49th Street was almost deserted when I got there. Just a couple of drunk guys in suits laughing too loud near the stairs, and an old woman clutching a grocery bag like someone might snatch it. When the train finally rolled in around 12:15, I walked toward the middle cars out of habit, looking through the windows for a seat where I could stretch out. Most of the cars had at least a few passengers scattered around. Someone sleeping across 3 seats, a guy with headphones nodding to music, a woman typing furiously on a laptop. But the second-to-last car caught my attention because it was nearly empty. Just one other person, a man sitting in the corner seat closest to the doors that connected to the next car. He was wearing a dark green jacket, the puffy kind that construction workers wear in winter, and a black baseball cap pulled low. I stepped inside and the doors closed behind me with that familiar chime. The car smelled like stale coffee, and something metallic, maybe from the heating system working overtime against the cold outside. I picked a seat about halfway down, across the aisle and several rows up from the man in the corner. Told myself it was better than being packed in with strangers, better than standing and holding onto a greasy pole for 40 minutes. I pulled out my phone and opened some article I had saved earlier, something about a documentary I wanted to watch. The train lurched forward and began its crawl through the tunnel, and I settled into that familiar rhythm of the tracks beneath us, the slight sway of the car, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. We stopped at Times Square and a couple of teenagers got on, laughing about something on one of their phones, but they walked through to the next car almost immediately. I glanced up just long enough to watch them go, then went back to my article. The man in the corner had not moved at all, not to check his phone, not to adjust his position, not even to look around when the kids passed through. He just sat there with his hands resting on his thighs, face angled slightly downward so the brim of his cap hid most of his features. I remember thinking it was a little strange, the way some people can sit so completely still, like they have turned off some internal motor that keeps the rest of us fidgeting and shifting. But I did not think much beyond that. People are weird on the subway. You learn to ignore a lot when you ride it every day for years. The train pulled out of Times Square and continued downtown, rattling through the darkness with that high-pitched whine the older cars make when they pick up speed. At Herald Square, the doors opened and I heard footsteps somewhere behind me. When I looked up, the man in the green jacket was walking toward the connecting door at the back of the car, the one that led to the last car in the train. He pushed through it and disappeared, letting the heavy door slam shut behind him. I felt a small wave of relief wash over me, the kind you do not even realize you are waiting for until it arrives. Now I had the whole car to myself. I stretched my legs out into the aisle and let my head fall back against the seat, closing my eyes for just a moment. The next few stops blurred together. 23rd Street, 14th Street, 8th Street. And I must have dozed off somewhere in there, because when I opened my eyes again, we were pulling into Canal Street, and my phone had slipped down between my leg and the seat. I fished it out and checked the time. Almost 12:45. A few more stops and I would be transferring to get home. That was when I heard the connecting door open again, the metallic screech of its hinges cutting through the quiet car. I turned my head and saw the green jacket first, then the black cap, then the slow, deliberate walk down the aisle toward me. The man had come back. He was not rushing, not looking around nervously like someone who had forgotten something in their seat. He moved with this calm purpose that made my chest tighten for reasons I could not quite name. There were dozens of empty seats in that car, rows and rows of orange plastic with nobody in them, and yet he walked past all of them. He stopped right in front of me and sat down in the seat directly across the aisle, maybe 3 feet away at most, close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke trapped in the fabric of his jacket, close enough that I could see a small scar running through his left eyebrow. He did not look at me right away. He just settled into the seat and placed his hands on his knees the same way he had before, palms down, fingers slightly spread. I pulled my legs back from the aisle and sat up straighter, trying to convince myself this was nothing, just a strange guy who wanted to sit near the door for his stop. But my heart was beating faster now, and I could feel sweat starting to prick at the back of my neck despite the cold air blowing through the vents above us. The train left Canal Street and plunged into the tunnel that runs under the East River toward Brooklyn. This stretch always feels longer than it should, maybe 5 or 6 minutes of nothing but darkness outside the windows and the roar of the tracks echoing off the tunnel walls. I stared at my phone screen without really seeing it, hyper-aware of every small movement from the man across from me. He had lifted his head now and was watching me openly, not even pretending to look at something else. His eyes were pale, grayish blue, and there was something patient in them, something that reminded me of the way a cat watches a bird through a window. I wanted to say something, ask him what his problem was, tell him to back off, but my throat felt tight and the words would not come. Instead, I just sat there, gripping my phone like it was some kind of shield, watching him from the corner of my eye while the train screamed through the darkness. Nobody else in the car. Nobody coming through from the other cars. Just me and this stranger and the river somewhere above us, pressing down with all that black water. He moved his right hand then, slowly, like he wanted me to see exactly what he was doing. His fingers slid up toward the cuff of his jacket sleeve and dipped inside, and when they came back out, they were wrapped around a handle. The blade was maybe 4 inches long, the kind of utility knife you can buy at any hardware store, with a worn black grip and a tip that caught the fluorescent light as he angled it toward me. He did not point it at my face or wave it around like some movie villain. He just held it low, resting against his thigh, letting me understand what it was and what it meant. My whole body went rigid. Every muscle locked up at once, and I could hear my own breathing coming fast and shallow, could feel my pulse slamming in my ears like a drum. The man tilted his head slightly and spoke for the first time, his voice quiet and flat, barely louder than the noise of the train. He said 4 words that I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "Do not move yet." The word "yet" hung in the air between us, heavy with promise, and I understood with perfect clarity that this man had done this before. This was not random. This was not impulsive. He had picked this car, picked this moment, picked me. I tried to think through the panic, tried to remember all those articles I had read about what to do if you get mugged, but my mind was just static and noise. The train was still moving, still hurtling through that endless tunnel, and there was nowhere to go. I thought about screaming, but who would hear me? The next car might as well have been a mile away. I thought about running for the connecting door, but he was closer to it than I was, and he had a knife. And what if he was faster? The man seemed to read my thoughts because he smiled, just a small curl at the corner of his mouth, and shook his head slightly. "Cameras in this car have been busted for weeks," he said, still in that same flat tone. "Checked last night. Checked again tonight before you got on. Nobody is going to see anything." He said it like he was explaining directions to a tourist, patient and matter-of-fact. I felt something cold spreading through my chest, this terrible understanding that I had walked into something planned, something methodical. The train began to slow, and I could see lights appearing in the tunnel ahead, the glow of the next station pushing back against the darkness. For a split second, I thought this was my chance. The doors would open, people might get on. I could yell for help or just bolt onto the platform and run. But as the train pulled into the station, I saw through the window that the platform was almost empty. One woman far down at the other end, walking toward the exit stairs with her back to us. A man in an MTA vest leaning against a pillar looking at his phone, too far away to notice anything happening in this car. The stranger stood up before the train had even fully stopped, moving to position himself between me and the doors. He did it casually, like he was just getting ready to exit. But his body blocked the entire path. The knife had disappeared back into his sleeve, but I knew it was still there. Knew his hand was wrapped around it inside that puffy green jacket. The doors slid open with a hiss, and cold air rushed in from the platform, carrying the smell of concrete and old garbage. He looked at me and nodded toward the opening. "You first," he said quietly. "Walk normal. Go left toward the end of the platform where it gets dark. We are going to have a conversation about what is in your bag and your pockets." His voice was still calm, still patient, like a teacher giving instructions to a slow student. I stood up on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. My bag was hanging from my shoulder, and I remember thinking about my laptop inside, about my wallet with maybe $60 and my credit cards, about my phone still clutched in my sweaty hand. None of it mattered. None of it was worth dying for. But something else was screaming in the back of my mind, some animal instinct that was telling me not to go with him, not to walk into that dark corner of the platform where nobody could see us. I had read stories about this, about people who cooperated with muggers and still ended up hurt, still ended up dead in some alley or stairwell because the criminal did not want to leave a witness. The man was watching me carefully, reading my hesitation, and I saw his jaw tighten just slightly. "Do not make this complicated," he said. And there was something harder in his voice now, an edge that had not been there before. The doors were still open, but I could hear the chime that meant they were about to close. I had maybe 5 seconds to decide what to do, 5 seconds to choose between walking into the dark with a man who had a knife or doing something desperate and stupid that might get me killed even faster. I did not make a conscious decision. My body just moved before my brain could catch up, some survival circuit overriding everything else. Instead of stepping onto the platform, I turned and ran toward the back of the car, toward the connecting door that led to the last car of the train. I heard him swear behind me, heard his footsteps slapping against the floor as he came after me, but I had a few seconds of head start and pure terror pushing me forward. I slammed into the connecting door and shoved it open, stumbling into the next car just as the closing chime sounded again. This car had people in it, maybe 5 or 6 passengers scattered around, a couple of them looking up at me with confused expressions as I came crashing through like a lunatic. I did not stop. I kept running toward the front of the car, toward where more people were, and I was yelling now, yelling that there was a man with a knife, that someone needed to call the police. Behind me, I heard the connecting door bang open and then immediately slam shut again. When I finally turned around, gasping for air, my chest burning, I saw him through the window of the door. He was standing in the empty car I had just fled, staring at me with those pale eyes. And then he turned and walked quickly toward the platform doors just as they were closing. He slipped through the gap at the last possible second and disappeared into the station. The train pulled away and I collapsed into the nearest seat, shaking so hard I could barely hold onto the pole beside me. A woman sitting across from me asked if I was okay, her face tight with concern, and I could barely get the words out to explain what had happened. Someone called 911, and the train held at the next station while transit police came on board to take my statement. I described him as best I could. The green jacket, the black cap, the scar through his eyebrow, those grayish-blue eyes that had watched me like I was already a victim. They told me I had done the right thing by running, that going with him to an isolated area would have been far more dangerous than anything that could have happened in that moment. They also told me that there had been a string of similar incidents on late-night trains over the past few months, always targeting solo passengers in cars with broken camera systems, always trying to get them off onto empty platforms. They never caught him, at least not as far as I know. I still take the subway sometimes, but never that late anymore, and never in an empty car, no matter how tired I am. Some nights I still dream about those pale eyes watching me through the connecting door window, patient and calm, like he was just waiting for another chance. LaGuardia Airport has this strange energy late at night, like the whole building is holding its breath between the last wave of arrivals and the cleaning crews taking over. I walked through Terminal B around 9:45 on a Wednesday in late October 2023, dragging my carry-on behind me and feeling every single one of the 4 days I had just spent in Chicago for corporate training. At 26, working my second year as a financial analyst at a midtown firm, I thought I had built up decent stamina for the grind, but something about fluorescent conference rooms and bad hotel coffee had completely wrecked me this time. The terminal was nearly empty, just a few scattered travelers and that distant hum of floor polishers echoing off the high ceilings. I had packed light on purpose, one bag and my laptop case, because waiting at baggage claim after a long trip felt like cruel and unusual punishment. All I wanted was to get back to my apartment in Astoria, maybe 20 minutes away without traffic, where my cat was probably shredding my couch cushions out of spite, and leftover pad thai was calling my name from the fridge. I pulled up the Uber app while walking toward the pickup zone, my fingers moving through the familiar routine without much thought. Request ride, confirm location, watch the little car icon inch toward my blue dot. The driver assigned to me was named Raymond, 4.8 stars, dark gray Toyota Camry, plate ending in 7YK. I did what I always do, screenshot the details and texted them to my younger sister Brianna, a habit our mom had drilled into us after years of watching true crime shows together. The car appeared within 3 minutes, and I checked the plate twice before climbing into the back seat on the passenger side, positioning myself behind the empty front seat rather than directly behind the driver. Raymond looked unremarkable, somewhere in his mid-40s, thinning hair, wearing a plain navy polo that could have come from any big box store. He said my name and destination in a flat voice without turning around, which suited me fine. After the week I had endured, small talk sounded exhausting. I buckled in, connected my phone to my portable charger, and watched the airport lights fade in the side mirror as we merged onto the Grand Central Parkway heading toward Astoria. For the first 10 minutes, everything felt completely normal. The highway was relatively clear for a Wednesday night, just the usual flow of taxis and ride shares ferrying people home from the airport. Raymond drove smoothly, staying in the middle lane, not speeding or making any sudden moves. I scrolled through my emails without really reading them, half listening to the low murmur of talk radio coming from the front speakers, some late-night program discussing local politics that I could not have cared less about. The GPS on the app showed our little car icon moving steadily along the expected route, the estimated arrival time ticking down from 18 minutes to 15 to 12. I remember thinking I might actually make it home before 11, which felt like a small victory after the chaos of the past few days. My eyelids were getting heavy, that specific kind of travel exhaustion where your body knows it is almost safe and starts shutting down prematurely. Then Raymond signaled right and began moving toward an exit I did not recognize. I glanced up from my phone, watching the highway signs pass, and realized we were nowhere near the Astoria Boulevard exit I usually took. When I checked the app, the route had changed, the blue line now snaking through unfamiliar streets instead of the straightforward path I knew by heart. Raymond must have noticed me shifting in my seat because he spoke for the first time since we left the airport, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "Expressway exit up ahead is closed," he said, eyes fixed on the road. "Construction or something. Gotta go around through the side streets, add maybe 5 minutes." It sounded reasonable enough. Roadwork in Queens was as constant as pigeons and overpriced coffee. I settled back and typed a quick message to Brianna. "Driver taking detour, says exit closed." Then watched the neighborhood outside my window transform from familiar commercial strips into something else entirely. The streetlights grew sparse. The buildings changed from apartment complexes and bodegas to long stretches of chain-link fence and dark industrial lots. We turned left, then right, then left again through a maze of streets I had never seen before in my 3 years of living in Queens. The names on the signs meant nothing to me. Rust Street, Varick Avenue, some numbered road that dead-ended into a wall of corrugated metal. Warehouses lined both sides now. Massive windowless structures with loading docks sealed by rusted roll-down gates. Not a single person on the sidewalks. Not a single car parked along the curb. The GPS on my phone showed our location as somewhere near Maspeth, an area I only knew by name from delivery tracking numbers. I typed another message to Brianna. "This feels weird, going through industrial area," but noticed the signal bar on my phone had dropped to a single dot. The message sat there with a spinning wheel, refusing to send. My chest tightened. I tried to keep my breathing steady, telling myself this was probably nothing, just an annoying detour through an ugly part of town. But my body was already shifting into a different mode, that ancient instinct waking up and flooding my system with something cold and electric. I decided to test the window. Casually, like I was just warm and wanted some air, I reached for the button on the door panel and pressed down. Nothing happened. I pressed again, holding it longer this time, but the glass did not move a single millimeter. The child lock indicator was not lit up, which meant the control had been disabled from the front. Raymond had full command of the windows and probably the doors too. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat as I glanced toward the front seat. Raymond was leaning forward now, his posture completely different from the relaxed slouch he had maintained on the highway. His eyes kept flicking to the side mirrors, then to the rear view, then back to the mirrors again, like he was watching for something behind us or waiting for something to appear. The car slowed as we approached a particularly large warehouse with a faded sign I could not read in the darkness. A loading dock jutted out from the building, its metal platform empty and streaked with rust. Raymond pulled the Camry to the side of the road and stopped, engine still running, headlights illuminating a dumpster overflowing with wooden pallets and plastic wrap. Every cell in my body screamed at me to do something, but I forced myself to stay still and think. Panicking would not help. Screaming would not help. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by empty buildings and silence so thick I could hear the engine ticking. Raymond had not said a word since his explanation about the closed exit, and now he sat motionless, hands still on the wheel, staring at the side mirror like a man waiting for a bus. I watched his reflection in the rear view and noticed his jaw was clenched tight, a vein visible on his temple even in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. He checked his phone, a quick glance down at the screen, then back to the mirror. I understood then with horrible clarity that he was not lost. He was not confused. He was waiting for someone, and that someone was supposed to meet us here, at this specific loading dock, on this dead-end street where no one would hear anything. My mind raced through options. The doors were almost certainly locked. The windows would not budge. I could try to climb into the front seat and fight him, but he was bigger than me and I had no weapon. I could scream, but there was no one around to hear. Then I remembered the emergency feature in the Uber app. I had never used it before, never even tested it, but I knew it existed somewhere in the menu. A panic button that would alert authorities and share your location. Moving as slowly as I could manage, I tilted my phone screen away from any possible reflection and opened the app. My hands were trembling so badly that I almost dropped the device twice. The safety icon was in the bottom corner, a small shield symbol I had scrolled past 100 times without really seeing it. I tapped it, then tapped Emergency Help, then selected the option to contact 911. The app asked if I wanted to share my trip details with emergency services. I pressed yes. And then, I had not expected this, had not known the app would do this. My phone spoke out loud in a clear, robotic female voice. Emergency assistance has been contacted. Your location and trip details are being shared with local authorities. The words filled the silent car like a gunshot. Raymond's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide and white in the darkness, and for one eternal second, we just stared at each other through the gap between the front seats. Then he moved. His hand shot to the gear shift and slammed the car into drive, tires squealing against the pavement as we lurched forward. I was thrown back against the seat, my phone flying from my grip and landing somewhere on the floor near my feet. Raymond was muttering something under his breath, the same phrase over and over, but I could not make out the words over the roar of the engine and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He took a hard left, then another, then sped down a straightaway so fast that the streetlights blurred into orange streaks outside my window. I braced myself against the door, certain we were going to crash, certain this was how it ended. But then he slammed the brakes so hard that my seatbelt locked and cut into my collarbone. We had stopped on a residential street, modest two-story houses with chain-link fences and small yards, a few porch lights glowing in the distance. Without a word, Raymond reached down to his door panel and I heard the click of the locks disengaging. He did not turn around, did not look at me, just sat there gripping the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles pale against the fake leather. I grabbed my carry-on from the seat beside me, scooped my phone off the floor, and scrambled out of that car so fast I nearly fell onto the sidewalk. The door had barely closed behind me before Raymond accelerated away, the Camry's taillights disappearing around a corner within seconds. I stood there on that empty street, shaking from head to toe, trying to remember how to breathe. The houses around me were dark except for a few scattered windows. I had no idea where I was. Somewhere in Queens, obviously, but the street signs meant nothing to me. My phone showed 2 bars of signal now, and the Uber app displayed a message saying my trip had been canceled by the driver. I called 911 immediately, my voice cracking as I tried to explain what had just happened. The dispatcher asked for my location and I had to walk to the nearest intersection to read the cross streets. 63rd Drive and Alderton Street. Somewhere in a neighborhood I later learned was called Rego Park. She told me to stay on the line, stay in a lit area, and that officers were being dispatched to my location. A patrol car arrived within 8 minutes, and I have never been so relieved to see flashing lights in my life. 2 officers, a woman named Hargrove and her partner whose name I cannot remember, listened to my story while I sat in the back of their cruiser with a blanket someone had given me. I showed them the screenshots I had sent Brianna. Raymond's name, his photo, the plate number, the car model. Officer Hargrove's expression changed when I mentioned the warehouse area near Maspeth, her eyes meeting her partner's in a way that made my stomach clench. She asked me to describe the exact route as best I could remember, the street names I had seen, the specific loading dock where we had stopped. I told her everything, including the detail about Raymond checking his mirrors like he was waiting for someone. She nodded slowly, wrote something in her notebook, and then said something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You're not the first person to report something like this." She explained that, over the past 3 months, at least 4 other women had filed complaints about rideshare drivers taking unexpected detours through that same industrial corridor near Maspeth. All of them had been picked up from LaGuardia or JFK late at night. All of them described being taken through a maze of empty warehouse streets. All of them reported that the drivers had disabled the window controls. The difference, Hargrove told me, was that I was the only one who had triggered the emergency alert. The other women had either talked their way out, pretended to be on the phone with someone, or simply gotten lucky when the driver changed his mind for reasons they never understood. One woman had been dropped off miles from her destination and told to find another ride. Another had noticed a second car following them before the driver suddenly returned to the main road. The police were investigating whether these incidents were connected, whether there was a coordinated operation using the rideshare platform to identify and isolate potential victims. They could not tell me more than that, could not say what exactly was supposed to happen at that loading dock, but the implication was clear enough. I gave a formal statement at the precinct that night, signed papers, answered the same questions from 3 different detectives. Brianna picked me up around 2 in the morning and drove me back to my apartment, where I deadbolted every lock and pushed my couch against the front door before I could even think about sleeping. In the weeks that followed, I learned that Raymond's Uber account had been deactivated and his profile removed from the platform, but the police never told me if they actually found him. I still take ride shares sometimes. I live in New York, it is nearly impossible not to, but I always sit in the back left seat now. I always keep my finger hovering near that emergency button, and I never ever let my guard down when the route starts looking unfamiliar. Some nights I still dream about that loading dock, about the sound of Raymond's breathing in the silent car, about what might have been waiting for us in the darkness if my phone had not spoken up when it did. My roommate Chloe always joked that I would marry my job before I ever married a man. In March of 2022, she was probably right. I had just turned 26, celebrated with a small birthday dinner at a Thai place near Midtown, and gone right back to working late shifts at the law firm where I was an administrative assistant. The partners there had a habit of staying until 9 or 10 at night, which meant I stayed too, organizing files, preparing documents, doing whatever needed to be done before trial dates. That particular Monday, I did not leave the office until almost 11. The E-train to Jamaica Center was my usual route home, a commute I had made so many times I could probably do it with my eyes closed. I lived in a small apartment about 15 minutes on foot from the station, in a neighborhood that was quiet, but never felt dangerous. Queens had been my home since graduating college, and I thought I knew its rhythms, its patterns, the way it breathed at different hours of the night. The train car was nearly empty when we pulled into Jamaica Center just after midnight. I checked my phone, 12:07, a text from Chloe asking if I wanted leftover pasta, and stood up as the doors slid open. The platform had that hollow quality that subway stations get when the crowds disappear. All fluorescent lights and echoing tile and the distant hum of ventilation systems. I walked toward the staircase at the far end, the only exit on that side of the platform. The escalator next to it had been out of service for what seemed like forever, a faded sign taped across the bottom step that nobody bothered to replace. So it was the stairs, a long climb up toward Archer Avenue, toward fresh air and the street and the walk home I had done hundreds of times before. I put one foot on the first step, my bag over my shoulder, my keys already in my hand the way my mother taught me when I first moved to the city. I was maybe 10 steps up when I noticed him, a man standing at the top of the staircase, silhouetted against the streetlights above. He was looking down at his phone, or at least that is what it seemed like at first glance. He wore a dark hoodie, jeans, white sneakers that caught the light. I did not think much of it. People wait at the top of subway stairs all the time, checking directions, texting someone, killing a few seconds before heading down to catch a train. But something about the way he stood made me slow my pace just slightly. He was not moving, not scrolling. Just holding the phone in front of his face like a prop, like something to do with his hands. I told myself I was being paranoid, that working late and being tired was making me see threats where there were none. I kept climbing, but I noticed my grip tighten around my keys, the metal edges pressing into my palm. When I slowed down, he slowed down too. That was the moment my brain started sending signals that my body had already received. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, adjusted his position just enough to stay centered at the top of the stairs. I stopped completely for a second, pretending to check my own phone, and I watched him through my peripheral vision. He did not descend, he did not leave. He just stood there, angling his shoulders in a way that would make it difficult to pass him on either side. The staircase was wide enough for maybe 3 people across, but he had positioned himself right in the middle, blocking the path to the street. My heart started beating faster, a dull thud in my ears that mixed with the silence of the empty station below me. I thought about turning around, going back down to the platform, but when I glanced behind me, I saw why that was no longer an option. Another man was climbing the stairs behind me. He had not been on the platform when I started walking. I would have noticed, I would have heard his footsteps. He must have come from somewhere else, maybe through a service door or from the other end of the station, timing his approach to meet me halfway up the staircase. He was bigger than the one at the top, broader in the shoulders, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He was not pretending to be casual. He was moving with purpose, taking the steps 2 at a time, closing the distance between us faster than I could process what was happening. The space between him and me shrank from 20 feet to 15 to 10. I could hear his breathing now, heavy and deliberate, and I realized with a sickening clarity that I was trapped. Above me, a man blocking the exit. Below me, another one coming up fast. And somewhere beyond the top of those stairs, I heard the low rumble of a car engine idling. I did what any person does when their brain finally catches up to danger. I calculated my odds in a split second. If I ran back down, the man behind me would grab me before I reached the platform. If I tried to push past the man at the top, he would have the advantage of higher ground, and there was no guarantee I could get around him. But I also knew that staying still was not an option. Staying still meant letting them close in from both sides, meant becoming whatever they had planned for me to become. So I made a decision that was less about courage and more about pure animal instinct. I screamed. Not a horror movie scream, not a dramatic yell. A raw, guttural sound that came from somewhere deep in my chest, loud enough to echo off the concrete walls of the stairwell. And then I ran upward, directly at the man blocking my path, holding my keys between my fingers like my mother had shown me years ago. He did not expect me to charge at him. I could see it in the way his body stiffened, the half-second of hesitation before he reached out to grab me. That hesitation was everything. I ducked low, aiming for the gap between his left side and the railing, and I swung my arm with the keys as hard as I could. I felt them connect with something. His arm, maybe his ribs, I do not know. And I heard him grunt in surprise more than pain. His hand caught the strap of my bag, yanking me backward for a moment, but I twisted my shoulder and let the bag slide off. I did not care about the bag. I did not care about my laptop inside it, my wallet, my keys that were now somewhere on the ground behind me. I cared about the street, about the lights I could see just beyond the top of the stairs, about the fact that if I could just get past him, I might have a chance. I broke through. My foot hit the sidewalk and I stumbled forward, nearly falling, catching myself on a parking meter that materialized out of nowhere in front of me. The cold metal against my palms felt like the most real thing I had ever touched. But I was not safe yet. I knew that. I turned my head just enough to see the car they had waiting. A dark sedan, maybe a Nissan or a Toyota, parked right at the curb with its engine running and the back door hanging open like a mouth. The man from the top of the stairs was coming after me, and I could hear the footsteps of the second one reaching street level. They were not running. Not yet. They were walking fast, confident, like they had done this before and knew that panic would make me freeze. But I did not freeze. I saw the lights of a deli about 50 feet down the block, one of those 24-hour bodegas with the green awning and the lotto signs in the window, and I ran toward it like my life depended on it. Because it did. The door had one of those bells that jingle when you push it open, and I have never been so grateful for such a small, stupid sound in my entire life. I burst inside, nearly knocking over a display of chips near the entrance, and the man behind the counter looked up with wide eyes. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair and a mustache and a Mets cap that looked like it had been worn every day for a decade. I could not speak at first. My lungs were burning, my throat raw from the scream I had let out on the stairs. I just pointed toward the door, toward the street, trying to make him understand that something was wrong, that someone was coming. He did not ask questions. He came around the counter faster than I would have expected for a man his age, and he locked the front door with a deadbolt that made a heavy, satisfying click. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed 911 while I stood there shaking, watching the street through the glass. The two men did not come to the door. I saw them stop about 20 feet from the deli, standing under a broken streetlight that flickered on and off, like it could not decide whether to work. They looked at each other, then at the bodega, then back at the car that was still idling by the subway entrance. The one in the hoodie, the one who had blocked the stairs, raised his hand in a gesture I did not understand at first. It looked almost casual, like a wave, like he was saying goodbye to a friend. Then they turned and walked back toward the sedan, unhurried, unbothered, as if the whole thing had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The car door closed, the headlights came on, and they drove away down Archer Avenue, disappearing into the night like they had never existed at all. I watched until the taillights were gone, until the street was empty again, until the only sound was my own breathing and the hum of the refrigerator case behind me. The police arrived about 15 minutes later, 2 officers in a squad car, who took my statement while I sat on a milk crate in the back of the deli, wrapped in a jacket the owner had given me because I could not stop shivering. I told them everything. The man at the top of the stairs, the one who came up behind me, the car with the open door, the way they had coordinated the whole thing like a routine they had practiced. The officers exchanged a look that told me more than their words ever could. One of them, a woman with short blonde hair and a tired expression, asked me if I could describe the vehicle in more detail. I told her what I remembered: dark sedan, 4 doors, maybe a Nissan Altima or something similar. She wrote it down without much hope in her eyes. Then she told me something that made the whole night feel even worse than it already did. This was not the first time. There had been other reports, other women who had been approached at that same staircase, at that same exit, late at night when the station was empty. Some of them had not been as lucky as me. The deli owner, his name was George, I learned later, let me use his phone to call Chloe, who came to pick me up in her beat-up Subaru with tears in her eyes and a baseball bat in the back seat. She did not say much on the drive home, just held my hand at every red light and told me I was safe now. But I did not feel safe. I did not feel safe for a long time after that. I stopped taking the E-train after midnight. I stopped working late shifts. I moved to a different neighborhood 6 months later, somewhere in Brooklyn where the subway stations have multiple exits and there are always people around, even at 2 in the morning. I never got my bag back. My laptop, my wallet, my keys, all gone. I changed my locks, canceled my cards, filed the reports. But none of that erased the memory of standing on those stairs, trapped between 2 strangers who had picked me like I was nothing more than an opportunity. The police never caught them, as far as I know. The reports kept coming for a while, then stopped. Maybe they moved on to another station, another staircase, another city. I do not know. What I do know is that I think about that night every single time I climb a set of stairs in this city. Every single time I check behind me. And I always make sure there is another way out. Anyone who lives in New York long enough develops a false sense of ownership over certain places. For me, it was Central Park. Specifically that stretch near the Ramble where the trees get thick and the city noise fades into something almost rural. My sister graduated from nursing school in 2014, which puts into perspective how long I had been walking those paths, camera in hand, chasing the perfect shot of the skyline bleeding orange and pink behind the tree line. Photography was my escape from the grind of working as a paralegal at a midtown firm, spending my days buried in documents that meant nothing to me. That Wednesday in early October, the air had that crisp bite to it, the kind that makes you feel alive and grateful to be outside. I left the office around 5:30, earlier than usual because my boss was out sick, and I figured I had maybe an hour of good light left. The plan was simple: walk through the Ramble, find my usual spot near the lake, snap a few frames, and head home to my apartment in Washington Heights before dark. I entered the park from the west side, cutting through the naturalist's walk with my Nikon hanging around my neck. The light was already shifting into that golden hour sweetness, painting everything in warm amber tones that photographers chase like addicts. There were still plenty of people around, joggers, dog walkers, a group of teenagers sprawled on the grass scrolling through their phones. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. I passed an older man feeding pigeons from a paper bag, and we exchanged that brief nod strangers give each other when they share the same peaceful corner of a chaotic city. As I moved deeper toward the ramble, the crowds thinned out the way they always do. The paths got narrower, the vegetation denser, and the sounds of traffic became a distant hum rather than a constant roar. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this little pocket of wilderness right here in Manhattan, how it almost felt like cheating to access this kind of solitude without leaving the city. I had walked this route dozens of times before, in all seasons, at all hours, or at least I thought I had walked it at all hours. The first thing I noticed was movement in my peripheral vision, somewhere off to my left where the brush got thick and tangled. I glanced over but saw nothing, just branches swaying slightly, which I attributed to a squirrel or maybe a bird settling in for the night. I kept walking, adjusting the settings on my camera as I went, trying to anticipate the exposure I would need once I reached the clearing by the water. Then I caught it again, this time on my right side. A shape, distinctly human, sliding behind a wide oak trunk about 30 feet from the path. My brain did that thing where it tries to rationalize what the eyes are reporting, suggesting maybe it was just another photographer looking for a good angle, or someone relieving themselves in the bushes. But something in my chest tightened, a primal alarm that had nothing to do with logic. I picked up my pace slightly, not wanting to seem paranoid, but also not wanting to ignore what my gut was screaming. The path curved ahead, and I told myself that once I rounded that bend, I would be closer to the lake where there would certainly be other people enjoying the sunset. When I made it around the curve, I stopped pretending everything was normal. There were 3 of them now, 3 distinct silhouettes positioned in a loose triangle formation, 2 behind me and 1 ahead, all of them partially obscured by trees but clearly tracking my movement. Every time I took a step, they took a step. When I paused, they paused. It was coordinated in a way that made my throat go dry because coordination meant planning, and planning meant intent. The one ahead of me was the largest, a broad-shouldered figure wearing a dark hoodie pulled up despite the mild temperature. I could not make out his face in the fading light, just the shape of him blocking the path like a toll collector waiting for payment. My mind raced through options. Call 911, but by the time anyone arrived, it would be too late. Scream for help, but the nearest visible person was probably a quarter mile behind me. Run, but run where? The 2 behind me had already started closing the gap, their footsteps crunching on dry leaves with a deliberate, unhurried rhythm. They knew exactly what they were doing. They had done this before. I made the decision to turn back, figuring my chances were better, trying to push past 2 of them rather than walking straight into the big one waiting ahead. But the moment I pivoted on my heel, the guy in front moved with surprising speed, closing the distance between us in seconds and stepping directly onto the path behind me. Now all 3 were on the same side, forming a wall between me and the way I had come. Up close, I could see more details. The leader was maybe mid-20s with a thin scar running through his left eyebrow, and eyes that looked through me like I was already just a wallet and a watch. The 2 flanking him were younger, teenagers probably, one of them fidgeting with something in his jacket pocket in a way that made me very aware of how soft and vulnerable the human body really is. Nobody said anything for a long moment. We just stood there in the dimming light, the silence broken only by distant traffic and the rustle of leaves overhead. Then the scarred one spoke, his voice flat and businesslike, almost bored. Empty your pockets. Phone, wallet, watch, camera. Put it all on the ground and walk away. Do that, and this stays easy. My hands moved toward my pockets on instinct, survival mode kicking in, but something made me hesitate when my fingers touched my camera strap. That Nikon was not just a piece of equipment. I had saved for 2 years to buy it, skipping lunches and picking up freelance gigs on weekends, and it held 3 months of work that I had not backed up yet. A stupid thing to care about when 3 strangers are circling you in a darkening park, but the brain does not always prioritize correctly under pressure. I pulled out my wallet and tossed it on the ground, hoping that would be enough. "Take it," I said, hearing the tremor in my own voice. "There is about $60 in there. Take the cards too. I will not cancel them for an hour. Just let me keep the camera." The scarred one did not even look at the wallet on the ground. He kept his eyes locked on mine, and I watched his expression shift from boredom to something harder, something that enjoyed being challenged. "That was not a negotiation," he said. One of the younger ones moved behind me, and before I could react, I felt a hard shove between my shoulder blades that sent me stumbling forward onto my knees, gravel biting into my palms as I caught myself. The camera swung forward and hit the ground with a sickening crack, and I heard one of them laugh, a short, ugly sound that had no humor in it. Before I could get up, hands grabbed the back of my jacket collar and started dragging me off the path, toward the denser tree line where the shadows had already pooled into something close to night. My heels scraped against the dirt as I tried to find traction, tried to plant my feet and resist. But whoever had me was strong and determined. "No one walks back here after sundown," the scarred one said from somewhere behind me, his voice carrying that same flat tone like he was reciting a fact rather than making a threat. "You should have known that." I understood then what was happening. They were not just robbing me, they were relocating me to somewhere more private, somewhere the transaction could take longer, somewhere screaming would not matter. The realization hit me like ice water, and I started thrashing harder, grabbing at roots and branches, anything to slow our progress into those woods. My mind kept flashing to news stories I had skimmed past without really reading. Stories about bodies found in parks, about joggers discovering things they wished they had not discovered. I managed to hook my arm around a small tree trunk, stopping our movement for a few seconds while I screamed for help at the top of my lungs. The sound came out ragged and desperate. Not the commanding shout I had imagined, but a raw animal noise that barely felt like it came from me. One of the teenagers kicked at my arm, trying to break my grip, while the other one grabbed my camera strap and yanked it over my head so hard it burned the back of my neck. "Shut up," the scarred one hissed, and for the first time I heard something other than boredom in his voice. Urgency, maybe even nervousness. That tiny crack in his composure gave me a sliver of hope, because it meant he was worried about being heard, which meant there might be someone close enough to hear. I screamed again, louder this time, putting everything I had into it, and I felt the grip on my collar loosen slightly. The 3 of them exchanged quick glances, some silent communication passing between them, and I could tell they were recalculating, weighing risk against reward. For a moment, everything hung suspended, me on the ground clutching that tree, them standing over me breathing hard, the darkness pressing in from all sides like it was waiting to see what would happen next. Then I heard it. Footsteps, rapid and rhythmic, the unmistakable cadence of someone running. The sound was coming from the direction of the main path, getting louder with each second, and I have never in my life been so grateful for the existence of joggers who refuse to quit before sunset. The scarred one heard it too, and his head snapped toward the sound like a deer catching a scent. He muttered something I could not make out, and suddenly the hands released my collar, and the weight pressing down on me lifted. I did not see them go. I was too busy gasping for air and trying to untangle myself from the roots I had been gripping. But I heard the rustle of brush and the snap of branches as they melted back into the woods, with the same eerie coordination they had shown when surrounding me. By the time the jogger rounded the bend, a woman in her 40s with a reflective vest and earbuds dangling around her neck, I was sitting upright against the tree trunk, covered in dirt and leaves, my wallet still lying on the path a few feet away. She slowed down when she saw me, confusion crossing her face, and asked if I was okay. I wanted to laugh at the question, but what came out was closer to a sob. Her name was Christine, and she stayed with me while I called 911, even though I could tell she had somewhere else to be. My fingers kept fumbling with the phone, hitting wrong numbers, and she finally took it from me and dialed herself, speaking to the dispatcher in a calm, clear voice that made me feel like maybe the world had not completely fallen apart. The police arrived within 15 minutes, 2 officers in a squad car, who walked me back to the path and took my statement while shining flashlights into the trees like they expected the attackers to still be hiding there. I described everything I could remember: the scar through the eyebrow, the dark hoodies, the way they moved in formation, the phrase about no one walking back here after sundown. One of the officers, a stocky guy with a gray mustache and tired eyes, nodded along like he was hearing a song he already knew by heart. "We have had 6 reports like this in the past 2 months," he told me, clicking his pen against his notepad. "Same area, same tactics. They wait for someone alone, surround them, try to pull them deeper into the woods where there are no witnesses. You got lucky tonight." Lucky. I turned the word over in my mind, trying to make it fit with the scrapes on my palms and the bruise forming on my neck where the camera strap had burned me. They never caught the guys who attacked me. I went to the precinct the next day to look at photos, spent 2 hours scrolling through faces on a computer screen until they all started blending together, but none of them matched the scar or the cold eyes I remembered. The officer with the gray mustache told me not to feel bad about it, that these groups were hard to pin down because they rotated members and changed locations before patterns could be established. He said it like it was just another fact of city life, like rats in the subway or tourists blocking the sidewalk. I got my wallet back. They had dropped it when they fled. But the camera was gone, along with everything on the memory card. 3 months of cityscapes and street portraits, including a series I had been planning to submit to a local gallery. I filed an insurance claim and bought a replacement body 6 weeks later, but I have not taken it to Central Park. I have not even walked through there on my way to somewhere else. My therapist says avoidance is a normal response to trauma, that eventually I will be able to reclaim those spaces, but I am not sure I want to. Some places just get ruined for you, and maybe that is okay. Maybe not every loss needs to be recovered. What stays with me most is not the fear, although that was real enough. It is the efficiency, the way they moved, the way they communicated without words, the way they knew exactly how to isolate someone and create a situation where all the power belonged to them. These were not desperate people making chaotic decisions. They were professionals running a system, and I just happened to walk into their territory at the wrong hour. I think about Christine sometimes, the jogger who saved me without even knowing she was doing it. I never got her last name or contact information, and the police did not seem interested in tracking her down as a witness, since she had not actually seen anything. She was just a woman finishing her evening run, completely unaware that her footsteps were the only thing standing between me and whatever those men had planned for the darker part of those woods. I hope she kept running that route. I hope her presence kept someone else safe on a night when the light faded a little too fast. And I hope, wherever those 3 are now, that they picked the wrong target eventually. Someone who fought back harder, or someone whose scream brought more than just a single jogger around that bend. Because I know they did not stop. People like that never stop until something stops them. Most days back then felt like a blur of long commutes and late-night shifts, and that morning it started like any other for me. I was living in a tiny rented room above a laundromat in Queens, juggling 2 part-time jobs and trying to convince myself I wasn't burning out. The only constant in my routine was catching the E-train, usually squeezing in with dozens of other half-awake people. That day, though, the platform felt strangely hollow, as if the city had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. I remember glancing around and noticing the silence first, the kind that settles on your shoulders before you even realize something's wrong. A couple of people lingered near the far end, but one man stood out immediately, watching me with an intensity that didn't match the stillness around us. He looked like someone who'd stepped out of the wrong decade, worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and a posture that suggested he didn't care who saw him staring. His eyes tracked every step I took along the yellow line, and even from a distance, there was something sharp in his expression, like he'd already made a decision about me. I tried pretending I hadn't noticed, focusing instead on the arriving train as it screeched into the station. My instinct was simply to get inside fast, pick the first open door and lose myself among commuters. The doors slid open in front of me, and without thinking twice, I stepped into the first car available, expecting the usual crowd. Only it wasn't a usual crowd. It was almost empty, maybe 3 people scattered across the far end, each absorbed in their phones. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with that tired buzz that always made me uneasy, and the stale smell of metal and old air trapped itself in my throat. Before I could even back out to choose another car, the doors hissed again, and that man from the platform slipped inside right behind me. He didn't say a word, just moved with this deliberate kind of calm that made the space between us shrink faster than I could process. When the train lurched forward, he settled near the door, leaning just enough to rest his hand on the release lever in a way that felt intentional. That's when the situation fully clicked in my mind. He wasn't just following me. He was making sure I couldn't leave. The car rattled through the tunnel, lights flashing across his face in short, cold bursts, and he shifted his jacket just slightly, enough for me to see the dark outline of a small handgun tucked beneath it. My throat tightened, but nothing came out. He leaned closer, voice low and steady, telling me I'd be getting off only when he said so, and only after handing over every single thing I carried. His tone wasn't frantic or loud. It was terrifying exactly because of how casual it sounded, like he'd rehearsed this with strangers 100 times before. I glanced toward the aisle, hoping for some impossible escape route, but the way he angled his body made it obvious he would react instantly if I tried anything. The train kept gaining speed, and every passing second stretched out in this slow, unbearable way. I tried to think logically, to keep my breathing steady, telling myself the next busy station would save me. But the man clearly knew the pattern of the ride better than I did. Each time the train began to decelerate, he shifted just enough to block the aisle with his leg, giving me a silent warning that felt louder than anything he could have said. The few passengers at the far end didn't even look up, completely unaware of how tightly fear had wrapped itself around my ribs. I kept my bag close, not out of defiance, but because I didn't know if handing it over too quickly would make things worse or trigger something unpredictable in him. What unsettled me most was how calm he seemed. His gaze drifted around the empty car as if he were bored, only snapping back to me with this razor focus whenever I shifted even an inch. There was a detail I still remember vividly, a thin silver ring on his right index finger, tarnished enough to show age but polished on one side, as though he rotated it often when he thought. He wasn't doing that now. Instead, his fingers tapped lightly on the release lever, a steady rhythm that made me feel like he was waiting for something. The tunnel light strobed across his face, giving him a hollow look, and the air between us felt heavier with every jolt of the tracks. When the train finally began slowing into a well-known transfer station, a flicker of hope sparked in me. I didn't plan anything elaborate. I just needed enough people outside those doors to create a moment he couldn't control. But he leaned forward before the train even stopped, angling his body to block the narrow path that led toward the exit. His voice stayed low, almost conversational, telling me not to even think about running. He didn't raise the gun fully, he didn't need to. Just the sight of the handle tucked beneath his jacket was enough to anchor me to the spot. My thoughts scrambled for any solution, any distraction, but time was collapsing fast, and the train was seconds from opening its doors. As the brakes squealed and the doors parted with that mechanical sigh, something broke inside me. A kind of desperate clarity. The second the gap was wide enough, I lunged forward, not with grace or strategy, but pure survival instinct. He reacted instantly, twisting his body to block me, but a couple of commuters standing just outside the door jumped back in shock when they saw me rushing toward them. Their surprise created a split second of confusion, and I slipped through that tiny space, shouting for help before my mind even caught up. People turned, startled, closing in around me, but the man didn't follow. He stayed in the car, sitting exactly where he'd been, his hand still on the lever, eyes fixed on me through the narrowing doors as they slid shut. The group of commuters around me kept asking what happened, but my attention stayed locked on the departing train as it rolled away with that man still staring in my direction. His expression never shifted, not even when the car disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. Something about that steadiness sank deep into me, the sense that he hadn't run because he didn't need to. A couple of people led me toward the station booth, and the clerk immediately called transit police. I tried explaining everything in order, but the details kept tripping over each other. The officer who arrived listened carefully, scribbling into a small notepad and asking me to repeat anything that stood out. The only thing I could cling to was that tarnished silver ring, and the way he kept tapping the lever like it was second nature. They escorted me upstairs to wait for a patrol car, and by then the adrenaline had faded enough for a heavy exhaustion to settle in. The officer explained that the cameras inside the cars rarely caught clear angles during incidents like this, especially when someone deliberately kept their movements subtle. He mentioned that there had been other reports, riders cornered in nearly empty cars late in the morning, or in awkward gaps between rush hours. Every victim described the same pattern. The suspect chose isolated cars, blocked the exit, displayed the weapon just enough to threaten but never enough to appear on footage. Hearing that chilled me in a way I still have trouble describing, because it meant he hadn't chosen me randomly. Hours passed before they released me, though it felt shorter somehow, like my brain had compressed everything into one long, distorted moment. I remember stepping outside the precinct feeling exposed, as if the city had grown eyes everywhere except where they were needed. The officer gave me a number to call if I remembered anything else, but I already knew there wasn't much more to give. The man hadn't taken anything from me in the end, but the thought that he could appear in another nearly empty car, watching someone else the same way he watched me, made my chest tighten. I kept replaying his calmness, the precision of his movements, and the eerie confidence in knowing no one would intervene unless he allowed it. That night, I changed my commute entirely. For weeks, I avoided the first two cars of any train, stuck only to crowded ones, and never stood near the ends of platforms again. I even moved apartments the following year, not because I thought he'd find me, but because I couldn't shake the memory of how easily he had trapped me in a space meant to be public and safe. The police never contacted me again, which probably means they never caught him. Sometimes when I pass a station and hear the train doors closing, that moment flashes back with startling clarity. His hand on the lever, his stillness, the unspoken message that he'd done this before. Maybe the only reason I got out was because the station happened to be busy enough at the right second. I don't pretend to understand why it ended the way it did, but I know one thing: I'll never board an empty train car again. The whole thing happened during a class trip to New York in early 2024, when our school brought a group of juniors to see a couple of museums and catch a Broadway show. At the time, I was 17 and mostly focused on keeping up with my friends, trying not to look clueless in a city that felt too loud for someone who'd barely left Massachusetts before. I shared a room with two classmates, Andrew and Melissa, and the three of us stuck together most of the trip, wandering through Midtown like we were pretending to be adults. The hotel we stayed at was one of those older budget places squeezed between taller buildings, with a lobby that smelled faintly like detergent and old carpet. Nothing seemed strange until that one afternoon, when we got separated from the rest of our group on the way back from the corner deli and realized none of our key cards worked. What happened next still sits in my memory like a bruise I can't explain to anyone who wasn't there. We figured maybe the front desk had reset something, so we headed toward the elevators, joking about how our classmates would roast us for getting locked out. When the elevator doors opened, a man in a red maintenance vest stepped out, carrying a crate of cleaning supplies and humming at a pitch that felt oddly deliberate, almost like he was trying to match the sound of the elevator fan. He didn't say anything to us, just raised his eyebrows and moved aside. We went up to our floor, but as soon as we stepped out, the hallway lights flickered in a slow, rhythmic way, like they were responding to movement we couldn't see. Every door on the floor, not just ours, showed the same red indicator: access denied. Andrew thought it was hilarious, so he started tapping his card faster, but nothing changed. Melissa pressed the call button for the elevator again, and when the doors reopened, the same maintenance guy stood inside, even though he'd clearly walked away minutes earlier. Andrew tried asking him what was going on, but the guy just tilted his head and pointed to a metal door at the end of the hall with a faded sticker that said, "Staff only." We had assumed it was locked, but when we walked closer, a gust of cold air seeped out from underneath, carrying a smell like dust mixed with something metallic. The door wasn't just unlocked, it stood slightly open, almost waiting for someone to nudge it. Melissa asked if this was the way back to the lobby, but the man didn't respond. He simply used his foot to keep the elevator door from closing while watching us with an expression so unreadable it felt rehearsed. We exchanged a silent agreement that anything was better than standing there with him, so we slipped through the service door, figuring it had to connect to the stairs. The hallway behind it looked nothing like the guest floors. The carpet gave way to concrete, and the walls were covered with handwritten notes taped above pipes, each marked with initials we didn't recognize. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in long, inconsistent hums, casting shadows that bent strangely around the exposed wiring. As we followed the narrow passage, we passed rusted carts stacked with torn linens and boxes labeled with dates that didn't match any schedule a hotel would ever need. The deeper we went, the more the air felt stale, like we were walking into a place meant to stay hidden. We kept going until the hallway opened into a storage area lit by a single bulb, where rows of plastic bins sat arranged in a grid. Inside them were wallets, IDs, and phones, dozens of them, spilling over like someone had swept entire nights of chaos into containers and abandoned them there. Melissa reached into one of the bins before either of us could stop her, picking up a driver's license with a cracked corner. The photo showed a woman who looked barely older than us, but the expiration date suggested she should have renewed it long before any of us were even in high school. Some of the wallets still had receipts tucked inside, stamped with dates from random cities across the country. Andrew found a phone with a dented frame and tapped the screen out of habit, even though it was dead. What struck me wasn't just the quantity, but the fact that every bin had a small laminated tag clipped to the front with handwritten letters: M3, B9, S4. None of it made sense. We whispered in circles trying to rationalize what we were seeing, until something clattered deeper in the room. Not loud, but intentional, like someone had nudged a metal tray to let us know we weren't alone. We moved toward the hallway again, sticking close together, but the path didn't look the same anymore. A sign that hadn't been there minutes earlier pointed toward a stairwell labeled "Basement Access," written in blocky stenciled paint. Even the air felt different, warmer now, carrying a faint bitter smell that reminded me of overheated electronics. Andrew kept glancing behind us, muttering about how the bins weren't just lost items. They looked organized, sorted even. When we pushed open the basement stairwell door, it let out a soft groan that echoed down the concrete steps. Light from above barely reached past the third step, leaving the bottom swallowed in a blurry darkness. Melissa insisted we go up, not down, but right as she said that, the sound of keys jingled somewhere below, followed by a slow scrape of something dragging across the floor. None of us agreed to run. We just ended up doing it at the same time. The staircase led to another service corridor, this one lined with metal doors that had no room numbers, only barcodes printed on stickers, some peeling, some newly applied. A small rolling table stood off to the side with an open notebook filled with lists of dates and initials, all written in the same heavy-handed block letters we'd seen on the bins. A digital clock mounted on the wall blinked the wrong time, resetting every few seconds as though it couldn't decide on the hour. Before we could process any of it, a voice echoed from behind us, polite, measured, and close enough to make Melissa flinch backward. It was the maintenance guy, his tone calm, asking if we had gotten mixed up and needed help getting back to our floor. His presence there felt too convenient, too practiced, as if he knew exactly where we'd end up. He guided us back through a shortcut none of us had seen before, a plain door that opened directly into our hallway. All the lights there were steady now, glowing with a warmth that made the whole basement ordeal feel unreal. Our door unlocked immediately when Melissa tried her card again, and the staff member just nodded once before walking away, his steps silent on the carpet despite the heavy boots he wore. The moment the latch clicked behind us, Andrew realized his phone was missing from the nightstand where he'd left it charging. He tore the room apart while Melissa stood beside him, trying to calm him down. I checked the drawers, the bathroom, even under the beds, but his phone had vanished completely. We agreed to report it after dinner, assuming housekeeping had accidentally moved it. But none of us really believed that. About an hour later, while we were getting ready to head downstairs and meet the others, Andrew's missing phone somehow lit up on his nightstand, the same spot we had searched repeatedly. The battery showed only 3%, yet the screen turned on long enough to reveal a string of unread messages. The sender ID wasn't a number, it was blank, just an empty field. The first message said, "You shouldn't have gone down there." The second followed a few seconds later. "Stay on your floor tonight." Andrew tried unlocking the phone, but it powered off instantly, like whatever had turned it on had only allowed it to stay awake long enough to deliver the warning. None of us spoke for nearly a minute. The room felt strangely quiet, like the hallway outside had been muted. Melissa suggested we go straight to our teacher, but when we opened the door, a housekeeping cart blocked the hallway, positioned perfectly in front of our room, even though no one was nearby. We pushed the cart aside and hurried to the elevator, but every button we pressed redirected us to the lobby, even when we tried selecting higher floors. The moment the doors opened, we spotted the maintenance guy standing near the front desk, but now he wore a regular button-down shirt instead of the vest, as if he had changed roles in the short time since we'd last seen him. When he noticed us, he gave a quick nod to someone behind the counter, a gesture so small we almost missed it. Right then, Andrew's phone lit up again, still supposedly dead, displaying one final message: "Don't talk." He palmed the phone immediately, shielding it from view. We had no idea who was controlling it, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Whatever this was, it clearly involved more than one person. We spent the next hour pretending everything was normal, sitting through dinner with the group, making small talk, trying not to let our eyes drift toward any member of the hotel staff. Andrew kept his phone in his pocket, afraid even to glance at the screen. At one point, a bellhop passed behind us carrying a tray, and when I turned slightly, I noticed a key card tucked into his belt loop with the same barcode formatting we'd seen in the basement corridor. That small detail made my throat tighten. It wasn't just a theft ring. People in the hotel were tracking guests, sorting their belongings, and monitoring anyone who wandered into restricted spaces. Whatever they planned to do with those items, or with the owners of those items, we didn't stay long enough to find out. The next morning, our teacher announced we'd be switching hotels due to a reservation miscommunication, though none of us believed that excuse. Andrew powered on his phone for real this time, expecting more messages, but everything had been wiped. No warning texts, no call logs, not even his lock screen photo remained. Melissa tried asking the front desk about the lost and found policy before we left, but the clerk just smiled politely and said they didn't keep misplaced belongings for more than a day. We didn't argue. We grabbed our bags, boarded the bus, and didn't look back. To this day, Andrew still refuses to stay in any hotel without taping over the peephole and putting his suitcase against the door. As for me, every time I think of those bins in the basement, I wonder how many people never realized their things didn't just go missing. They were taken, categorized, and stored by someone who was watching them long before they ever checked in. Some years back, during a stretch when work kept me bouncing between small towns in upstate New York, long drives became part of my routine. That particular afternoon had been quiet, the kind where the sky looks washed out and tired, and the highway hum becomes almost hypnotic. I remember feeling oddly alert, though, like the day had a sharp edge to it. I'd rented a silver sedan with a loose rattle in the dashboard, and I kept thinking I should have asked for another one, but I just wanted to get moving. My plan was simple: reach a modest motel near a truck stop, sleep, then finish the drive the next morning. Nothing unusual. At least that's what I believed. Somewhere between Albany and Syracuse, traffic thinned until it was just me and a few scattered vehicles drifting in and out of view. That's when I noticed a car pulled onto the shoulder, a dark SUV with one headlight flickering like a dying pulse. Beside it, a man waved both arms in this frantic, jerky motion, like someone desperate to be seen. His jacket looked oversized, hanging off him in strange angles, and he kept glancing toward the tree line as if expecting someone to step out. It wasn't the usual, "Hey, I need help" vibe. It felt more calculated, like a scene arranged for whoever happened to pass by. Still, I slowed down, torn between instinct and caution. As I rolled closer, my gut tightened at the details. The SUV had plates covered in grime thick enough to hide any letters, and the man's face looked oddly shadowed even in daylight, like he'd chosen the angle deliberately. I eased back into the lane instead of stopping, telling myself I'd call for help once I was safely ahead. He changed his gesture the second I accelerated. Less of a wave, more of a signal. That shift made my neck prickle. I called 911 right away, giving the operator every detail I could. Her tone shifted instantly when I mentioned the SUV and the man's build. She told me there had been reports of a group staging fake breakdowns on that exact stretch of road, luring drivers into robberies. Her words hit harder than I expected, mostly because the situation had felt wrong in a way I hadn't been able to articulate. I stayed on the line until she assured me a patrol car had been dispatched. Then I tried to shake it off and continued toward the motel. But the drive wasn't peaceful anymore. Every car in the rear view felt too close. Every turnoff looked like a place someone might wait. By the time I reached the motel around dusk, I was drained. I checked in, parked under a buzzing security light, and tried convincing myself the worst part of the day was already behind me. I couldn't have been more mistaken. The room they gave me had one of those long windows that sat just above eye level, the kind meant to offer light but not much of a view. After dropping my bag on the sagging armchair, I tried to settle in, ordered takeout, turned on the TV, pretended the drive hadn't rattled me as much as it did. But every little noise outside felt amplified. Doors shutting in the parking lot sounded too sharp, and even the hum of a vending machine down the hall had this weird metallic rhythm to it. I kept replaying that moment on the highway, wondering if I should have stopped, wondering if he saw me dialing 911. I tried to push the thought aside, but it clung to me like static. When darkness settled in, the parking lot took on a different personality. From the corner of the curtain, I could see the glow of the street lamps staining everything a dull amber. Shadows stretched across the asphalt in long, warped lines. I remember thinking the place looked abandoned, even though I knew the lot was half full. I'd just taken my shoes off when a sound, soft, uncertain, tapped against the window. At first I thought it was the heater kicking on, or maybe branches brushing the glass. But then it came again, this gentle, deliberate tapping, spaced just far enough apart to feel intentional. My chest tightened as I approached the window, half expecting it to be nothing. Peeking out required lifting the curtain only a sliver. The cold air from the window frame brushed my face as I tried to adjust my eyes to the dim light outside. At first I didn't see anything, just the reflection of the parking lot lights bouncing off my own shadow. But then a shape shifted, someone standing just beyond the glow of the nearest lamp. A person positioned at an angle where their face stayed hidden, like they'd practiced how to avoid the light. What hit me next wasn't recognition, it was the posture. The same crooked stance, the same stiff shoulders as the man waving on the highway. He hadn't stayed behind. He'd followed me. I stepped back from the window so fast I knocked into the armchair, sending my backpack tumbling to the floor. The tapping started again, slower this time, like he wanted me to know he wasn't leaving. A strange, heavy silence settled between each sound, stretching my nerves thinner with every second. I thought about calling 911 again, but part of me panicked at the idea that he might hear my voice. Instead, I grabbed my phone and typed out a message to the front desk, hands clumsy as I tried to keep quiet. I didn't know how he'd found me after I drove off, and the thought alone made the room feel too small to hide in. The front desk clerk responded quicker than I expected, saying he was sending someone from maintenance to take a look outside. That phrasing didn't give me much confidence, but it was better than sitting there doing nothing. While I waited, the tapping stopped, replaced by this faint crunching sound on the gravel beneath the window, like someone shifting their weight back and forth. I stayed perfectly still, staring at the door, half convinced the handle would start turning. The air in the room felt heavy, not in a supernatural way, but in the way a situation feels when you realize you're suddenly not in control of anything around you. Every second stretched out, and I kept listening for footsteps approaching from the hallway, praying the maintenance guy wouldn't walk straight into danger. A knock finally echoed from the hallway, 2 short taps on my door. I nearly jolted out of my skin before I remembered the clerk's message. I moved slowly, forcing myself to check the peephole first. The man outside looked older, with a salt and pepper beard and a baseball cap embroidered with the motel's faded logo. He kept his flashlight lowered, pointing at the floor, as if trying not to draw attention through the window. I cracked the door open and whispered that someone was standing outside my room. He didn't even look surprised, just let out this long breath like he'd dealt with similar nonsense before. He motioned for me to stay inside, then stepped out of view. Seconds later, his flashlight beam arced across the parking lot, stopping in the exact spot where the figure had been standing. I heard him call out a firm, steady, "Hey!" the kind of voice older men use when they're not looking for trouble but won't back down either. There was no answer. He called out again. Silence. He walked farther into the lot, sweeping the light between the cars. Watching that beam move made my heart pound harder than seeing the figure itself. When he returned to my door, he looked unsettled, even if he tried hiding it. He told me nobody was out there anymore, but he also didn't think I should stay in that room overnight. The clerk offered to move me to a room on the 2nd floor, away from the parking lot entirely. I jumped at the chance. The maintenance guy insisted on walking me upstairs, and I didn't argue. While we crossed the lot together, I kept scanning between the cars, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Not even the whisper of gravel shifting. But the whole walk, I couldn't shake the sensation that the lot wasn't empty at all, that someone was watching from a place I didn't know to look. When we reached the new room, the maintenance guy paused before leaving and told me, very quietly, to keep the curtains closed no matter what I heard for the rest of the night. His voice had a seriousness that made it clear he wasn't being dramatic. Once the door clicked shut, the room felt safer, but only barely. I locked every latch the door had, then pulled the curtains tight until no light leaked through. I tried lying down, but my mind kept looping back to the SUV on the shoulder, and the way that man shifted his gestures when he realized I wasn't stopping. The police operator's warning replayed in my head too. Those crews had been operating for months, using different vehicles and sometimes switching drivers to confuse descriptions. That detail gnawed at me. It meant the man outside the motel might not have been alone. It meant the SUV on the highway might have been just one piece of a setup I'd managed to avoid by pure luck. Even with the curtains closed, I felt exposed. I turned on the TV for background noise, keeping the volume low. Every small creak in the building sounded sharper in contrast. The pipes clicking, the floorboards adjusting, distant voices from other rooms. Then, sometime past midnight, something new cut through the noise. A single scrape, like someone dragging their fingernails along the metal railing outside. Slow, intentional. The sound trailed across the length of the balcony, pausing every few seconds as if whoever was out there wanted to listen in between movements. I didn't dare look through the peephole. I didn't move at all. I just sat in the darkness, breathing as quietly as I could, listening to that awful, steady scrape glide closer to my door. Then it stopped. No footsteps, no voices. Just a long, suffocating stillness that lasted so long, I began questioning whether I'd really heard anything at all. I sat there until my legs went numb, waiting for the sound to return. It didn't. After several minutes, I heard a door somewhere down the balcony slam shut hard enough to rattle my wall. Whether it belonged to a guest or someone who'd been prowling up there, I couldn't tell. I stayed awake until dawn, afraid that if I closed my eyes, I'd hear that scrape again, and this time it would stop right at my door. When morning finally broke and light filtered around the edges of the curtain, it felt like the entire building exhaled. I checked out the moment the front desk opened. The clerk barely made eye contact when I told him I was leaving early, but he did say one thing before I walked out. "You're not the first person this month to ask for a room change." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push him. Outside, the lot looked perfectly ordinary in daylight. No footprints, no unusual cars, no evidence that anything had happened. But as I drove away, I kept checking the mirrors, making sure no SUV lingered behind me. Nothing followed. Nothing happened on the rest of the trip. Yet even now, I still think about how precise that tapping was, how the man had found me miles from where I'd passed him, and how someone dragged their hand along the railing outside my room the same night police warned me about roadside robbery setups. I don't have an explanation for any of it. All I know is that refusing to stop on the highway likely saved me from something far worse, and getting moved to the second floor might have done the same. Whatever that man wanted from me, he didn't get it. And for reasons I can't explain, after that night I never saw him again. Not on the road, not outside a motel window, not anywhere,